Today's panel, we have a trio of great experience in our industry, and we're going to be talking a little bit about our franchise of Intrinsic products and kind of the lineage of plant health as it's been discovered both from our side as a basic manufacturer and from the research side and our end-use customers. So I think just to start out, we'll have each of you introduce yourselves, and maybe Kathie, we'll start with you.
Okay. So my name is Kathie Kalmowitz, and I've been with BASF for quite a few years and had the ability to work in both the R&D area of the company as well as to move over to tech service. So I've been in the tech service role for about 15 years. Been very fortunate to know Dr. Martin for the entirety of the type of work that I've been involved with. And my region for BASF is the South. So I have North Carolina South to Florida and Puerto Rico, and then on over to Texas. So over the years, we've seen the transition from the very beginning of the work that I did was to be looking at bent grass, and we definitely have transitioned to Bermuda. And so my experiences in the area of plant health and with our intrinsic products have been across both bent and Bermuda.
Good. Thanks, Kathie.
Okay. Bruce Martin with Clemson, or was with Clemson. I just retired back in the summertime, so I guess it still says Clemson, but they quit paying me about 6 months ago. So I was with them for 31 years, extension and research, plant pathologist, all turf grass. Eventually, I actually started out there doing field crop research on that great crop tobacco in the southeast, and cotton and corn and everything else. I kind of arrived there in the good old days when golf was just booming. They were building golf courses like crazy. We had probably 50% of our golf courses had bent grass greens at the time. So we lived through all those bad summers with bent in that environment, which is very incredibly stressful. Still got some bent there, but when the ultra-dwarf Bermuda grasses started coming on in the late 90s, South Carolina actually was one of the early adopters of the ultra-dwarfs, and we worked with those ever since. And so it's been a great place to be from the standpoint of diseases because bent grass and Bermuda grass, ultra-dwarf Bermuda grasses in that environment really get hammered. So, and I've worked with all the chemical companies, worked with BASF, I guess, from the beginning of that. From your, what was your experimental number? 700? 500. Okay, that's important because that's when I first saw the plant health effects out of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Bruce.
Yep.
Jeff?
So I'm Jeff Corcoran. I'm the manager of golf course and grounds at Oak Hill Country Club in Rochester, New York. We manage 36 holes of bent POA, greens, tees, and fairways. And we've been fortunate enough at Oak Hill to host every men's rotating major championship. And I haven't been there for all of them, but it is a good piece of the world. We don't probably see the disease pressure that Dr. Martin sees down in Clemson, but we have our fair share of issues that we have to deal with throughout the growing season.
Awesome. Thank you all three for joining us. And Jeff, I'm going to put you on the spot first. So as a former golf course superintendent, and it's been a lot of years since I've worked in that capacity, but I certainly have an appreciation for how superintendents are extremely observant in being able to identify and ascertain how products can bring maybe some elevated or heightened plant health to the equation. Sometimes it's almost an ancillary benefit, but in talking about plant health, so Jeff, how do you, in a world where plant health is kind of nebulous and it's thrown around somewhat loosely, how do you identify or how do you define plant health? How do you monitor plant health? And then as a golf course superintendent, how do you let plant health make help you make the decisions that you do to maintain optimum playing conditions?
Yeah, for me personally, and I'm sure that if you asked every golf course superintendent, it would vary a little bit, but for me, plant health equals performance and what we can do to the golf course. And, choosing products that promote plant health allow us to provide what we need to provide for our membership. And it comes down, that's how we evaluate it, is that, given various weather conditions, how far we can push the plant, how healthy that plant is to allow us to do what we need to do to make sure that our end users are happy.
Yeah, it's well said. I think there's almost been a paradigm shift. If you go back into the 70s and 80s, I think arriving at some of those optimum playing conditions meant putting turf through some pretty high levels of stress, and sometimes speed was associated with how well you could refrain from adding plant health, because the old adage was healthy greens weren't great putting greens. But I think in this era, I think we've seen bolstering plant health allows you to utilize more tools to bring more performance to the golf course.
To that point that you mentioned, I have a set of stimp meter sheets in my office from Joe Hahn in the 1989 U.S. Open, and I think that the peak speed in 1989 was 10.4 for the U.S. Open, and we're regularly trying to achieve 11, 12, 13 in some cases. In cutting heights, I'm sure that you guys can attest to that, and a lot of people that are standing out here can attest to. The shift in cutting heights and where they are, and the pressures that we put on the grass plant on a daily basis,
sure.
Puts a true emphasis on plant health and the selection of products that the superintendents have to use. And, again, that plant health equals performance, and it equals satisfaction to our membership, the end users, and job stability, really, for when it comes down to it.
That's a great point. So, Dr. Martin, we're all taught the disease triangle, host, pathogen, environment. I think at the same time, if you look at susceptibility to a disease, it almost is like there should be a third leg to that triangle, like a disease pyramid, and that's plant health, because I think it can have an impact on how turf can be susceptible or resist that disease invading a specific host.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. It's really the reason we went over to Bermuda grass was because the environment became so stressful in our area that bent grass became untenable, really. But the Bermuda grass is actually put through just as many paces, and we see a lot of challenging issues with that. And I see it. I like the idea of the resilience that you were talking about. It adds resilience, and we're always looking at kind of the scientific end of it. What is changing in the plant that's making it more resilient, and BASF knows that. With the Intrinsic, they know how it's changing plant physiology. Systemic fungicides, those that get into the plant, ever since some of the early ones, we've seen changes in plant physiology. Mm-hmm. Some of those are negative, like growth regulation out of some DMI fungicides and things like that. Some of them are positive, like additional greening, and we kind of know why that happens. But when this actually, where this got legs with me was in the summer of 2007, and we had a field day in August, and we were looking at program approaches in bent grass, and we were putting the QOI fungicides like Insignia in the middle of the summer, where they were going to do their best for brown patch and things like that, and Pythium root decline or root dysfunction. Well, it turned out it was 112 degrees, and I'm not lying, the week before our field day, and it cooled down, thank God, to 107 degrees for our field day. And all the plots where I had all these different programs, I think I had 22 programs out there, and it turned out I had one that turned out to be number 13. It was the 13th treatment. It had Insignia in there twice. Those plots were the greenest and healthiest, and everything else was crashing all around in all that heat. And I said, boy, well, there's something different here that's beyond disease control under that condition. And we've seen that phenomenon in different ways, in other systems, but that's where I first saw it. So if you can get great disease control and promote, a more vigorous plant, then you're just that much ahead.
Especially when you know that weather is going to, Mother Nature will throw that curveball, and whatever you can do to help mitigate some of that stress, whether it's environmental or imposed to get good playing conditions,
right.
That sometimes that little extra ounce of prevention can be what makes all the difference. So Kathie, can you talk a little bit about how, as the plant health story began to unfold, some of the other things that you were able to observe from end users and cooperators that has kind of helped us bring a lot of these stories together? And I know we shared a lot of time together at Farm
Right.
Links back in the day, and thank goodness for Program 13, because I talked a lot about Program 13. And
Well, and Brian, because we as a tech team came down, Kyle Miller, myself, and our boss came down and invaded you and said, we know that our product, based on the labs in Germany, our products have been diagrammed to interact within the metabolic pathways in the plant, and therefore we should be seeing something. And as Bruce mentioned previously, people saw it on the outside. They saw it on the surface. And I remember the three of us getting, looking from green to green to see what we could see. We were looking for greening. We were looking for, obviously, the density and the quality of the turf. But after that phone call, I called Bruce on Friday before the field day, and I was very aware of the fact that all of our work to that date had been on bent grass. And I was very aware, because Raleigh, North Carolina was going through some of the same environmental temperatures. And I said, so Bruce, you just came in from the plots. What are we going to see next week? And he said, some people are not going to be happy, Kathie, because there's a lot of plots out there that don't have any grass. And he said, pause, pregnant pause, but you're not one of those people. He said, I think we're going to have a good discussion. There's going to be a lot to see. And what we found was that we needed to look different. We needed to look differently, and we needed to look below the surface. And if we really went back and looked at what our scientists in Germany was telling us about the product, is that the effect on the pathways was that a lot of the ability of the plant as it goes into the stress, those carbons were being shuttled into greater roots. And the only reason why those plots had more turf was because during that stress event, it had triggered that mechanism within the plant based on the fact that pyraclostrobin insignia were on those plots. And all of that ability to save the turf through that stressful time period was because it was below the surface. And as we started developing the product, we got more sophisticated in taking measurements. We took lots of cores out of his plots. And we learned from our university colleagues different methods to be able to show why that's important. Why is it not only on the surface more important to have more roots to get you through a stressful time period, but in the end, did our product really bring that benefit? And that's what we were able to start connecting the dots. And we did see it, and we repeated it, but most importantly, it was repeated at golf courses. It no longer was just in the research plots, but instead, many of the people who had already adopted insignia because it was such a good fungicide, they were now seeing it for themselves because they were able to have a little bit more of a peace of mind as they went into the heat of the summer. So we started recommending, when you put together a program, you use that product at those times where you get the biggest benefit from that chemistry. And that's how we came up with a lot of the work that we did on validating a program and where the best use of the product was.
That's right. And like I say, timing is everything. And Jeff, you know that. And I think BASF has done a good job in trying to understand what was going on beyond just disease control, because it's in everybody's best interest to steward that product correctly as a fungicide first and use in a proper rotation. But if we can communicate where these products fit the best into a program where you can leverage some of those extra benefits from shuttling the carbon reserves, as you mentioned. I mean, roots is the stress. It is the currency of summer stress, and the more roots you have, the better you can withstand and mitigate what Mother Nature throws at you. So where I think we have done a good job from learning from our customers and from our scientists and R&D is, hey, where can we best leverage not only the fungicidal attributes of these products, but the additional benefits as well. And I think the more you know about how a chemistry behaves and what your key pathogens that you're fighting, the better success rate you're going to have. And I think it's important for our customers to know that, and we're very committed to continuing that research with our next generation of plant health products, with Navicon, with Maxtima as well, and complementing and putting more tools in the toolbox. So what are some other things, Jeff, that you've been able to maybe see from a turf manager standpoint on how plant health is giving you better opportunities to make more informed decisions on the products that you use?
Yeah, as it relates to, say, Intrinsic products, at Oak Hill Country Club, Insignia has become our go-to QOI in our rotation of our programs, especially in that particular neck of the woods with Poa annua and summer patch and typical root dysfunction diseases during the middle of the summertime, is that it is a cornerstone part of what we do. And, we started out with some other QOIs until the Intrinsic brand came along, and we just see overall through the course of summertime that we see better plant health. I think we see better efficacy against some tough diseases sometimes with summer patch, especially in our neck of the woods.
Sure.
I think that's the biggest one as far as greens are concerned, and it's just a great rotational product for us to put that in there. And that relates into, it's not just about, if you have summer patch, and I know that some of these guys have battled some summer patch that are sitting over here, is that's not just a disease. It's one of those inflictions that that's going to lead into more hand watering, more babysitting. You're going to be there till 8 o'clock at night sometimes if it's warm enough. And to be able to have that peace of mind that you're putting down a product that can have efficacy on those types of diseases, it's a huge peace of mind. And that relates right back into that performance and that health of that plant, and allows us to do what we need to do.
So summer being a key stress time for you, Dr. Martin, as we've talked about with the movement in ultra dwarfs and the transition zone in south, that those roles get flipped. And we see what plant health means to those warm season grass growers in the shoulder sides of the season. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen there? Yeah,
and I guess that was the next kind of eye-opening thing, and it was with Lexicon. And we were targeting Lexicon for actually fall and winter disease control. And it's a very broad spectrum mixture. One of the diseases that we were targeting is spring dead spot. So we would typically do 2 applications of Lexicon in September, October, let it ride. Mm-hmm. And some of the early work, we noticed, number one, awesome turf quality, because it was also controlling leaf spot, dollar spot, anything pretty much that we might see on semi-dormant and then eventually dormant Bermuda grass. But the thing that really opened our eyes was at spring green up. And you would see those plots just, I could pick out the Lexicon plots the following July. Yeah. And this was in comparison to other pretty good treatments. and that was all due to 2 applications in the fall. So it's almost startling that effect can last that long. But what it is, I'm sure, is it's conserving carbohydrates, shunning the carbon in the fall, and it's all about carbohydrate storage, and that's your energy to come out of winter. And we have some funny winters where we'll green up and then we'll get knocked back down into dormancy, and that's a bad deal from the standpoint of the plant, because there's just so much carbon there, and after a while you'll run out and they don't come back. So that was the second I think big kind of eye-opening thing that I saw with it.
So we've learned a little bit about cool season management, warm season management. I think the next chapter that we saw get uncovered was a lot of the renovations with ultra-dwarf Bermudas and the sprigging and enhanced grow-in periods because of the pre-treatment with Lexicon. Kathie, can you talk a little bit about how that impact has brought some new understanding of plant health?
It really has, because obviously the products were designed with golf in mind, in order to bring value, in order to give the turf that residual effect that you needed to count on. And that was from a disease standpoint as well as from a plant health standpoint, because we know that as a superintendent, you're purchasing a fungicide. And therefore, as Bruce mentioned, it is actually a product that when you put it down, it was going to bring that spring dead spot. It was going to bring that leaf spot control, which is part of the overall plant health story. But what about those other people that are part of our overall turf community? And that began with you, the superintendent, if you're faced with a renovation, having good quality sprigs or sod delivered to your golf course. And so we were very fortunate. Gary Myers at our Pinehurst event, he was able to work with a sod farm on some of the renovations that were going on at Pinehurst. And it was through his work and the sod farm partner that we were involved with, they were willing to pre-treat, as you said, pre-treat the sod at the sod farm in order to give better quality to those sprigs that were then going to be harvested and brought to Pinehurst for the grow-in. And so Gary was able to help us prove that concept, because again, we knew that with those stored carbohydrates, that meant that the turf was going to take off faster. When those sprigs got put in, especially under golf conditions where you've got the irrigation and you've got the fertility, other requirements, that the turf was going to take off. But we never really thought that it was going to be as beneficial as what we have now seen. And because of that, we've been able to take it to more sod farms, where the sod grower himself now knows that he is actually growing better quality turf that he is delivering. And one of our partners has recently told us that it has saved him callbacks. They are not getting calls back because of poor quality sprigs. They're actually benefited within their own operation. More value has been given to the turf that they are supplying.
Yeah. So some of the light bulb moments that we saw as this whole plant health story began to develop was, we know that we can block ethylene production, which is a stress hormone. And when you harvest Bermuda grass sprigs, there's not much more stressful than ripping sprigs out of the ground and washing them and putting them in a burlap bag and shipping them across the country.
That's
so
right.
What we saw from that was pretty startling.
It
and
was.
I know, Dr. Martin, you were in on some replicated research showing some of that. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. And I kind of got interested in this from a different disease, but it was still using intrinsic products, and it had to do with St. Augustine grass. So it wasn't have anything to do with turf, but it had to do with disease called gray leaf spot that just hammers St. Augustine in the summers. And these sod growers were getting callbacks for selling bad sod when really what it was a disease that gets started at the sod farm, and then it incubates in the pallets at the site where the sod is laid. And my brilliant idea, it's a pretty simple idea, was to treat it at the sod farm so that that sod would arrive in a more healthy state and we could prevent some of those callbacks. And so we did that protocol with actually Lexicon and Pillar, and it worked beautifully. We could treat it at the sod farm one time, harvest the sod, bring it to the site, and that sod would establish successfully compared to untreated sod. And we did it the other way where it wasn't treated at the sod farm, but then we treated it at planting, and that also helped quite a bit. But to me, the obvious thing was that the sod grower should accept some of the responsibility for providing a healthier plant and prevent those callbacks on that. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind all along, but then when you started doing the Pinehurst projects, and Kathie and I were asked to write a program for a big golf course in South Florida who was undergoing major renovations, and we kind of knew that this should work, but we wrote what we considered a bulletproof program for him. Well, the key was that the sprigs be treated at the sod, or the sod be treated before those sprigs were harvested. And this fellow's grow-in, he had the worst conditions in the world for a grow-in. He had like 25 inches of rain during the 6 weeks that he was trying to get those sprigs.
It was a hurricane, right?
Well, it was a tropical depression that came in off the Gulf and just stalled out and just soaked them, and no sunlight is worse than the water almost, from the standpoint of Bermuda grass. And yet he grew in successfully. I was really surprised, under those conditions. So anyhow, I hear about the Pinehurst thing, and you can see visually that difference after sprigging. So we renovated a green and decided to try it with one of our sod growers who provides Tiff Eagle. And he treated one time 7 days before the sprigs were harvested. And, he harvested the sprigs. They arrived at our site in a box. Well, normally they heat up overnight. We left them in the box, came out the next morning to sprig. The untreated sprigs, like sprigs normally look, they almost look dead. They're brown. They're senescent. Yeah, they're not dead, but they look dead. And the sprigs that were rolling out of the treated box were like they were harvested 30 minutes ago. They were green and growing. They had new roots growing out of the crowns. And I'm like, well, there's the difference right there. And sure enough, after about 4 weeks, you've seen some of these pictures. It's just, you don't need statistics to tell the difference there. It's not a subtle difference. It's a major difference.
And I think one of the most exciting points is when you look at the economics of a total greens renovation on 18 holes, the input, the price to pre-treat those sprigs is less than an acre of actual turf that's treated. So it really puts into light, that's a great insurance policy.
Yeah.
So
I think somebody'd be crazy not to do it. That's my opinion.
And we're not leaving cool season out, because Kyle went up to Michigan and worked on a Kentucky bluegrass fairway, where instead of sprigs with the cool season grass, he harvested sod. And then they relayed it in order to show that if you had to, fill turf in someplace, the benefit. And so what we've always tried to do is challenge ourselves. We don't say, hey, it worked one time. Instead, we take it and try to apply it to another condition, and in this case, cool season, because it was very visual with the warm season sprig being able to grow in faster. But we were able to replicate the ability with the intrinsic-based fungicide down, that benefit for sod being able to be used as it's moved, and you have to have quick tack down in order to have a good playing surface again.
And disease control is part of this. It's not just plant health. That's the thing about the sprigging is for Bermuda grass, you're watering it 4, 5, 6 times a day initially to keep those sprigs from drying out. And you're fertilizing the heck out of it to get them to establish.
There's that triangle.
There's that triangle again, and it's really a recipe for Pythium.
Yeah.
And we know Pythium is part of it. Strangely, when I think about this, why haven't we been studying this for 30 years? We should have, because that's it's kind of obvious now, but it just didn't seem like it was before.
It's been a fun ride. It's been 10 years from Pythium root dysfunction to Program 13 to Insignia getting plant health on the label, and Ulterdorf installation and the move to Ulterdorf in the transition zone. We've seen a lot of great things from the Intrinsic franchise of plant health products from BASF, and I'd like to open up if there's any questions about Intrinsic products, Insignia, Honor, Lexicon. Would be happy to field any questions. If not.
So, you know, Brian, one of the things, we're sitting in California, and this used to be ground zero for rapid blight.
That's right.
And in those dry years when you all are forced to not have the rainfall to try to flush through the type of irrigation water that many of you have to use, where you have the buildup of salts, that disease became very prevalent, still is, as one that has to be managed. And again, that is taking out a cool season grass that's usually been established into your Bermuda base. And it just so happened, again, it's like bookends, because it happens where at the same exact time we were having a drought on the East Coast, and we were still having a lot of overseed go down in the Myrtle Beach area. And it just seemed like through the years we had inklings that Insignia was different than other products that were in the market, but we really couldn't put our finger on it until we were able to understand its ability to help the plant move through the disease, because it's controlling it, and actually help the grass continue to keep its roots and continue to grow through that stress event. And so over the years, we've seen that rapid blight is a stress-induced disease. Pythium root dysfunction is a stress-induced disease. Take all root rot is. And now we've really felt more comfortable connecting the dots. Very strong disease control, but the ability of this group of chemistries that are all part of the Intrinsic family to help the plant actually then grow more resiliently through that stress time. But Dr. Martin was the other bookend on the East Coast doing the rapid blight work.
I don't know why I forgot about that, because it was one of the more interesting disease problems I've ever seen. That's such a unique disease, and it's the only effective QOI. We can put other QOIs out for that disease and get no effect, nothing. And you put Insignia out and you control the disease. And the mode of action is the same among those fungicides. So there's something different.
Well, I think it's, we now know what the salt factor is. It's such a huge stress. And again, the plant is being protected in more than one way to benefit from the ability to grow through that stress event.
I think it's about understanding the total package, and not just categorically putting fungicides into groups that you think are all similar and all have the same strengths and weaknesses, because they don't. Well said. Okay, could we have a round of applause for our panelists today? We appreciate your guys' time. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to more stories of plant health from BASF.